So last night we saw a good ball game, an overtime game with the Chargers and Raiders, with the Chargers winning. But here, Week 15 sleeper quarterbacks you could play this week. The first guy's Nick Mullens of the San Francisco 49ers. Mullens, another week, another start for him. San Francisco, they got a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys that give up the fifth most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And Nick Mullens, he's been up and down most of the season in his starts, but I think this week versus Dallas, this is more for two quarterback leagues to play Mullens. He could get 20, 25 fantasy points. Last week in a tough matchup versus Washington, he had 260 yards, a touchdown, and an into, and a 2-point conversion and a fumble loss. A mediocre game it was for Mullens. But this week versus soft Dallas Cowboys secondary, I think Mullens has a good game, and he's a quarterback that's available in 95% of fantasy leagues. So if you're in a two-quarterback league or a crazy deep league here in your semifinals and you need someone, Nick Mullens is the first option. The second quarterback is Mitchell Trubisky of the Chicago Bears. Trubisky, he's been playing pretty decent as far as fantasy football-wise the last few weeks now since he became the starter. In Week 12 versus Green Bay, 25 fantasy points with 242 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 windows, 11 rushing yards, a 2-point conversion and fumble loss. Then Week 13 versus Detroit, 267, a touchdown, 6 yards, and a fumble loss on the ground, 15 fantasy points. And then last week versus Houston, he exploded with 267 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 23 rushing yards. And this week in Minnesota, I think it's going to be a decently high-scored game. Trubisky and Allen Robinson, they've been on the same page and making plays. And Cole Kmet, he's starting to step up as well in the passing game. So this week versus Minnesota, I think Trubisky could be a decent sleeper option. Even if his team's getting blown out, I think a lot of garbage time points Trubisky could get in this one. So he's the second sleeper at quarterback. And the third and final quarterback sleeper of the week's Drew Lock of the Denver Broncos. Lock, he had a great ball game last week versus the Carolina Panthers, where he went for 33 fantasy points on 280 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and a fumble loss. And Locke, we've seen flashes this season of him have some good ball games. He's a guy I'm not that confident in, but if I need him this week in a pinch, he's got the matchup versus the Buffalo Bills tomorrow at 4:30 is Drew Lock. And Lock, you know his team's probably going to be trailing, and there could be some garbage time fantasy points out there for him. And he gets a decent amount of yards a game. Just the turnovers and not scoring touchdowns have been his problem this season, and some injuries. Lock's available in 88% of leagues, but he's a sleeper. So that's a few quarterback sleepers I have here heading into Week 15.